Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are about to start this afternoon session, so please have your seat. Kindly come in front of the podium and take your seat. Ladies and gentlemen, please have your seat so that we can start the session of the afternoon. Before entering directly into the second panel discussion, actually, we would like to show you an additional video, which provides in few minutes an overall look at the importance of remittances for sustainable development. And we hope that it can inspire you in the discussions of this afternoon. So without further ado, I'm going to ask to turn down the light a little bit and to show the video. Thank you.
Food, shelter, books, school fees, medical expenses. These are some of the most common uses of remittances, the money sent by migrants to their relatives back home. A lifeline in rural areas where 75% of the world's poor people live. This is where remittances count the most. They can make up more than half of a household's total income. This year, more than 200 million migrants sent over $600 billion back home to over 800 million family members. A flow of resources much larger than official development assistance or foreign direct investment. Every dollar they send supports their families and helps them build a better life, individually and directly contributing to ending poverty and hunger, promoting good health, quality education, clean water and sanitation, decent work and economic growth, and reducing inequalities. An invaluable contribution to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. However, average transfer costs are still high in many countries, and traditional banking services can be difficult to access or are absent for a significant portion of the global rural population, excluding it from the formal financial system and from most opportunities to gain independent, secure livelihoods. But the recent experience of the pandemic saw digital platforms emerge as a revolutionary force, capable of overcoming many barriers. Pushed by COVID-19's physical restrictions, regulations and infrastructure have started adapting, making it easier to sign up for digital products. In turn, more service providers are adapting their services for rural people and are reaching out to marginalized people such as women, youth, and people living with disabilities. Digitalization also plays an increasingly important role in linking remittances with services and products, such as savings, credit, and insurance, which can be specifically tailored to small-scale farming, where we know that a large portion of remittances is invested. Mobile banking apps allow individuals to open and operate bank accounts, manage businesses, access capital or savings, and insurance services, all in a few taps on a smartphone, allowing for an easier access into the formal economy. With the help of mobile wallets and online platforms, remittances can be sent and received instantly, securely, even in remote rural areas, and mobile money remains the cheapest transfer method. This is why the International Day of Family Remittances campaign 2023-2024 focuses on promoting digital technologies to enhance financial inclusion in low and middle income countries and reduce remittance cost to the SDG 10.C target of 3%. At IFAD, we believe that the partnerships between member states, international organizations, private sector, and civil society will prove essential to achieve safer, faster, cheaper remittances and make them count more for millions of families around the world. Globally, remittances are expected to reach a total of $5 trillion by 2030. Help us build stronger partnerships to harness their potential and directly engage with 1 billion people in working towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, one family at a time.
Hello, dear colleagues. I am Maxime Thibon from IFAD, from the division ECG, Environment, Climate, and Gender and Social Inclusion. So I'm not from the Diaspora and remittances world, you know, so we hope that the discussion we will have this afternoon and during this panel, we will also focusing on this issue related to land health and climate adaptation, but also on climate mitigation. As a debrief, you know, what I heard this morning, you know, I will say that, you know, we realize that the connection between diaspora investment, remittances, and climate resilience and land use planning, land management is existing. We recognize it, you know, very well, but we also recognize that there is still a lot of work, you know, to be filled, gaps to be fulfilled, bridge to be built, you know, to make this interaction more effective. During this session, we will listen and interact with 4 panelists, each representing different aspects of this nexus between remittances, diaspora, and sustainable development. They will present their activity and will tell us how they have already answered, you know, to some questions, some issues that have been already raised this morning, such as like monitoring and evaluation, de-risking, and also like knowledge transfer. So I will invite to join me on the stage, Mr. Moudou, please. Mr. Frédéric Ponceau, Moussa Bakayoko, and Raoul Antao. Before to start, I will have to tell you that some intervention will be in French. So for the English speaker, you know, please, you know, take your headset. So we will start with Mr. Moudou Gay. So, bonjour, Monsieur Gay. Vous êtes le président de Sunugal, une association italienne basée à Milan et qui mène à la fois des activités culturelles en Italie, mais aussi de développement socio-économique au Sénégal. Vous êtes venu avec une présentation dans laquelle vous allez nous présenter comment Sunugal agit pour le développement local et aussi auprès des paysans dans certaines régions du Sénégal dans le cadre de leur activité agricole. Dans cette présentation, on espère que vous allez nous présenter les activités et comment aussi elles sont mises en place. Et j'espère aussi que vous allez pouvoir aussi nous présenter quels sont les besoins que vous voyez, que vous avez déjà identifiés dans le cadre de votre activité pour poursuivre le travail à plus grande échelle, à la fois au Sénégal, mais pourquoi pas à des échelles dans d'autres pays de la région du Sahel. Je vous laisse la parole, Monsieur Gay.
Je m'excuse avant tout de mon français parce que j'aimerais parler italien. Je m'excuse de mon français parce que j'aimerais parler italien, parce que tout ce que je fais, je l'ai appris ici en Italie et en italien. Quand j'étais au Sénégal, je ne savais pas lire ni écrire en français. Je l'ai appris ici. Alors, je m'excuse. Mais j'aimerais vous dire que je suis très content vraiment d'être ici, d'avoir écouté toutes les interventions de ce matin. C'est parce que je suis en Italie depuis 1990. J'ai écouté différentes conférences, rencontres que j'appelle quelquefois blabla. Mais ici, aujourd'hui, vraiment, partant de Louise, je ne sais pas où elle est, et l'autre femme, vraiment, avec leur intervention, il m'a beaucoup touché. C'est parce que j'ai reçu dans mon cœur des messages assez intéressants. Les autres interventions ont été assez intéressantes, c'est parce que je n'ai jamais pensé que IFAD ou des organisations comme vous sont là à toucher certains arguments. C'est parce que quelquefois, je suis invité, je dis pourquoi la diaspora ne sont pas impliqués, pourquoi pas toucher certains arguments, mais vraiment tous ces arguments-là, pour moi, pour nous, en tant que Sunugal, en tant que Moudou, vraiment, je vous dis que sont tellement intéressants et je suis ravi et content d'être là. L'association Sunugal, c'est une association, je peux dire italo-sénégalais, on peut dire internationale. C'est parce que dans le Sunugal, il y a des Ivoiriens, des Burkinabés. On travaille avec des Marocains etc., etc. Comme vous voyez, à Milan, on a le Centre international du quartier, Centro international du quartier, avec laquelle on collabore avec différentes associations. Mais quand on parle de l'investissement ou la valorisation des envois de la diaspora, nous, en tant qu'association, ça fait des années qu'on travaille avec, on a travaillé avec différentes ONG, avec différentes organisations, avec laquelle OIM, Fondation Carré pour la mairie de Milan, qui est le premier bailleur qui a financé le premier projet dans nos villages, avec un investissement de, je peux dire, 10 millions de lire. Mais à travers ça, je peux vous dire que nous, comme Sunugal, on a fait des investissements qui dépensent plus de 1 million d'euros dans le domaine agricole, de l'élevage, accompagnant la diaspora sur la boulangerie, par exemple. Maintenant, au Sénégal, il y a un réseau de boulangeries qui compte plus de 200 et quelques membres, que 90% sont des immigrés qui sont été ici en Italie. Comme vous voyez, à travers Sunugal, nous sommes sollicités par différents maires aux mairies. Notre maire, tout récemment, il a créé une centrale solaire au Sénégal. Quand on parle de, comment dirais-je, de changement climatique, on peut dire que nous, on l'a commencé, ça fait presque plus de 30 ans. C'est parce que nous, en tant qu'association Sunugal, chaque année, chacun de nous, on fait des cotisations pour renforcer les projets, les idées dans nos villages. Chez moi, quand j'étais petit, il n'y avait pas l'école, il n'y avait pas l'eau potable, il n'y avait pas l'électricité. Mais maintenant, mon village, c'est mieux qu'un petit quartier du Dakar. Les maisons sont toutes faites avec, je ne peux pas comment dire ça, mais maintenant, vraiment, on a premier étage, deuxième étage dans nos villages. À l'époque, les gens partaient, quand ils retournaient en Italie, vont acheter des maisons à Touba, à Dakar, mais maintenant, tout le monde va faire leurs investissements dans les villages. Ça, pour nous, c'est important. Comme vous savez, à Dakar, tout récemment, dans les années passées, on a eu des inondations, il y a assez de difficultés, avec laquelle je peux dire que grâce à l'investissement de la diaspora, grâce à l'aide de la diaspora, on a pu faire des maisons en dehors de Dakar, en dehors de ces zones-là. Maintenant, vraiment, les gens sont contents. Mais ce qui manque, selon moi, selon nous, en tant que diaspora, en tant qu'association Sunugal, c'est l'implication dans les programmes d'investissement. Je partant du gouvernement européen et des gouvernements africains. Combien de fois nous sommes interpellés par le gouvernement du Sénégal parlant de la valorisation des envois, de la valorisation des investissements? C'est parce que ce matin, j'ai entendu parler d'investissement de 200 euros. Mais attendez, 200 euros, c'est bon et bien. Mais le vrai investissement, ce n'est pas les 200 euros. Les 200 euros sont juste pour la nourriture. Comme vous savez, je peux dire que 90% des Sénégalais sont plus de 120 000, je ne sais pas, en Italie. On a eu l'occasion d'acheter une maison au Sénégal, dans nos villages, dans nos quartiers. C'est nous qui avons payé l'investissement pour faire arriver l'électricité, pour faire arriver l'eau. C'est nous qui l'avons payé. Dans plusieurs villages, c'est nous qui avons construit les écoles directement. Les dispensaires ne sont pas 200 euros, sont plus de 200 euros. Moi, personnellement, je peux vous dire que je connais plus de 100 migrants que je peux appeler d'ici, qui ont fait des investissements qui vont au-delà de 200 000 euros. Je ne connais plus de 10 qui ont fait des investissements qui vont au-delà de 3 millions d'euros sur des stations de services, sur l'agriculture, sur l'élevage, etc., etc. Ce que j'aimerais que le gouvernement du Sénégal, le gouvernement italien ou européen, va interpeller ces gens-là, parlant avec eux, et pour voir comment on peut les aider et comment on peut valoriser ces argents. J'ai entendu parler aussi de les voies légales formelles et informelles. Je vous donne un exemple. Moi, je fais part d'une famille des agriculteurs, de l'autre côté d'une famille des commerçants, des businessmen, je peux dire. Il y a plusieurs entre eux pour acheter des marchandises des produits en Italie, on ne va pas l'argent. Non. Il appelle Modou en Italie. Il lui dit, Modou, est-ce que vous avez 15 000 € ici en Italie? Modou dit oui, j'ai 15 000 € ici. OK. Si tu peux laisser ces 15 000 € avec l'entrepreneur italien, je vais vous donner les 15 000 € au Sénégal. Où la traçabilité? Où la traçabilité? J'ai donné seulement l'exemple de 15 000 €, mais il y en a qui font plus de ça. Mon oncle, il était arrêté une fois à l'INATE. Il avait plus de 120 000 € comptant. Ouais. Il m'a appelé, il m'a dit, Modou, il y a un problème. La finance m'a arrêté. Quel est le problème? C'est parce que, oui, Tons, on ne peut pas utiliser ça. On ne peut pas faire ça. Ça, c'est un problème réel. On a essayé de parler avec les banques. Je donne l'exemple de Banque Crédit Agricole du Sénégal. Je l'ai invité ici à travers une autre banque italienne. Mais le problème, c'est que les responsables de la Banque du Crédit Agricole ne m'écoutaient pas. Quand on a fait la première rencontre à Treviglio, le directeur m'a dit, Modou, écoute, on t'a financé ton événement culturel parce que moi, je suis acteur. On t'a financé, donc le business, on va le faire entre nous, banque et banque. Vous voyez, ça, c'est pas bon. Je suis acteur du développement. Je travaille avec la diaspora. Ce serait bien de voir quelle est la nécessité de la diaspora pour créer des relations entre banque et banque. Mais les banques font les accords. Après, on t'amène les volantini, tu vas faire la communication. Mais ce n'est pas bon, ça. Il faut les impliquer, demandant quelle est votre nécessité, quel est votre besoin, qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire. Quand on parle de l'agriculture, c'est la même chose. Dans nos zones-là, maintenant, je vais dire que je ne veux plus faire des projets agricoles en tant que Modou, c'est parce que j'ai vu les membres du Sunugal qui font individuellement, qui font des investissements qui vont au-delà de 70, 80 000 € pour faire leur forage. Alors le Sunugal, il n'a pas plus besoin de faire ça, c'est parce que les membres du Sunugal le font. Alors ce qui est important et intéressant pour moi, de voir comment accompagner et comment aider ces gens-là qui ont l'intention de travailler dans ce domaine de l'élevage, de l'agriculture, etc., etc. Je vous remercie. Merci.
Merci Modou d'avoir mis le doigt sur certains encore aspects qui n'ont pas été abordés ce matin. On est moins intervenu sur la dimension agricole, mais tu as précisé que justement qu'il y avait quand même eu de la responsabilisation des membres de Sunugal pour investir eux-mêmes dans le pays. Ils bénéficient quand même, j'imagine, fortement des appuis techniques que vous avez pu développer dans le cadre de Sunugal. Et j'imagine qu'il y aura aussi beaucoup de questions qui vont arriver à la suite à ton intervention. The second panelist is Frédéric Ponceau, Senior Technical Specialist on Remittances, Diaspora and Inclusive Finance. Frédéric, in several recent surveys, remittances have been identified as a significant mitigation strategy against agricultural risk and environmental shock, I will say, mainly in developing economy. Could you give us more insight, on the connection between remittances and agricultural risk, and also to have some point on the appropriate approach, to manage them and to optimize remittances in this context?
Okay, we'll try to do so. First of all, I wanted to thank Modou. This is a great testimony that you made. Je vais le faire en français alors. Je pense que c'est important qu'on ait des témoignages comme ça, et puis on va continuer la discussion, je pense, sur notamment le besoin d'impliquer la diaspora et dans les services de transfert d'argent, comme dans les options d'investissement, quoi. C'est pas le cas. En gros, on a des sociétés de transfert qui font que du transfert, et puis quasiment pas de solution d'investissement. Donc, je pense que ça, c'est une discussion qu'on peut garder pour après. regarding the question, the climate risk and how do they respond and how remittances contribute to mitigate the exposure to climate risk. First of all, in Sahel countries, the main risk are the erratic rains. And it's more and more predictable to know when the rain will fall with which intensity. So this is what is expressed in our surveys, as Martin shared this morning. So the issue is the producers, they are challenged to know when to plant and when to harvest. And the risk is to have a bad harvest and no income or no food to eat or lower amount of food at the end of the seasons. So this is what they are facing. And so to address this risk, remittances helps in the main way it addresses those risks is to provide a recipient with an additional income to put food on the table, to simply put, and also to a lesser extent to save some money and to buy quality inputs and change their agricultural practices. So those are the strategies that are put in place by remittance recipients and that are relatively efficient, but still it's more a survival strategy rather than, let's say, a resilient strategy so far. So they need more support to shift from survival strategy to resilient strategy. So for the moment, the remittances is really a tool that helps the remittance families to cope with the immediate impact of climate changes. But they need more support from donors, from also financial services, so they can define their own strategy, something more sophisticated, building upon their positive mindset, the fact that they are fed properly and they can think about middle-term strategy and not just to react to immediate issues. But still, they need more support in that regard.
Thanks, Frederic. So some remark on just what you say. They need support. Do they need like some technical support, scientific support in their activity? Like you mentioned, that there is like this issue of erratic rain, issue of like productivity. What is done really, with as a strategy, what is provide, to this producer?
So it's a mix of both financial services that are catered to their circumstances, so suited to their needs, and additional non-financial services like weather information, agricultural advices. So it's a mix of services. So far, they access remittances, so they have a relationship with financial service providers. So they have to enter a financial service provider premise to cash out the remittances, but they need more awareness about the relevance to use saving services in case of hardships, to learn also how to use loans and also insurance and all a wide array of services that help them to develop their entire strategies. And on top of those financial services, they need also weather information, when to plant, when to harvest. They need information about good input suppliers, information also on how to make their agricultural practice evolve so they are more resistant to erratic rains and so on and so forth. So this is where the donors can help. Because the financial service provider alone they see remittance recipient mainly as one service users, as Modou was mentioning. So, and they focus only on remittances. So the financial service providers, they need incentive to understand what are the other needs that that are suited to remittance recipient, especially savings for purposes such as health, health issues, education, that are the main expenditures that are faced by rural households, how to access loans, agricultural loans, and also complex products like weather insurance. So the financial service providers, they need to understand all the needs that are required for rural population, especially remittance households, and they need to use the remittance service as an entry point to build the whole financial journey, the complete financial inclusion that was mentioned by Joan this morning regarding to build their resilience with financial services. But combined with this array of financial services, they need also other services that are not commercially viable at the very beginning of the partnership between the financial service provider and those external providers, because someone has to pay for the service. So at the beginning, donors, they need to support the combination of financial and non-financial services, so they can build the whole strategy that is suited for rural recipients.
And just a quick remark, do you have any example, of this interaction, with financial service provider, and maybe, I don't know, like some huge project like in the south, such as like Hydromet, or also some meteorological center at national scale, that's like some first interaction. Does it exist, or is it locally?
For the moment, it's not. There's no example of a case that would make that would combine all the services. So there are cases where you have microfinance institutions that are providing financial education, entrepreneurship support, and try to also provide weather information to rural producers. So that exists. But this is really the exception. So in many instances, you have financial service providers providing financial literacy because this is their business interest to remittance recipient. But that would be the innovation to be brought by the kind of initiative that 3S is intending to do, to build these resilience strategies. So this is an innovation that should build upon current practices, current remittance recipient practices in terms of savings, in terms of asking the migrant to be insured at the last resort, as it was mentioned in the presentation this morning. So then we need to build on those practices, on those adaptation practices, to bring them to the next level, to the resilient level, by providing them financial services and non-financial services. This is an innovation that must be incremental based on existing practices. So we need knowledge of how remittance recipients are using their remittance to cope with climate risk. We need also to provide incentive to the private sector, especially financial service providers, so they innovate with this target group that is potentially commercially viable in rural areas.
Yeah, thanks, Frédéric. I'm pretty sure
I didn't provide example.
Yeah, but
Oh, sorry, I have one or two. And I will respond to Modou. For instance, in Senegal, what we are currently doing with a program that is called Prime. We are working with InTouch and Orange Money to set up some agent in rural areas where there's no access point, if you prefer. So that would avoid your uncle to carry the suitcase with the banknotes. In this case, we have we have identified the areas where people are receiving phone calls from France, from Italy, and where there are not enough access points. So the role of InTouch, which is this is an aggregator of payment services, but also an agent network manager, is to settle some agent at the very last mile based on the information they have in terms of phone calls received from abroad, and also presumably a lot of remittances. So that was the first step. And we have identified 120 plus localities in rural Senegal. And now they are implementing agent for 400 agents. And we reach out the communities in France to assess where they would like to see the rural agent activated. So this is one aspect, so providing access at the last mile to avoid informal transfer, to avoid people to travel with the money. The second aspect we want to implement in the project is cash to good payment services. So instead of sending money, this is what Modou also explained, is to give the opportunity for migrants to pay for a voucher, and the relatives go to the shop, the village shop, to gather food and basic goods. This is the second service that is catered to. This is not related to climate risk directly, but this is part of the equation. And addressing climate risk, what we also want to implement is a partnership with a fintech or agri-tech called MyAgro, which is providing quality inputs in rural Senegal. And they provide those inputs through by also educating rural population to save by installment. So they purchase the inputs by saving money. So depending on the crop they are targeting. And with MyAgro, what we want to do with InTouch and Orange is to give the opportunity for the migrant to pay the inputs for the family. So that way they will access to quality inputs, and also trainings on how to use those new agricultural practices and quality inputs. So this is one service we want to test with InTouch. And what we have learned is that it's easier to implement those innovation with small companies than the biggest companies, because the biggest companies, they have one product, they have one process, they are not very keen to experiment and to innovate. But still, the advantage of big company is their outreach. So when I'm talking about financial service provider, we need to find the good combination. So the big players, so we have outreach, but also not the small, but innovative fintech players that can innovate because they have an interest to do so.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Frédéric, for this example. We can see there is a lot of room, you say of work, in this within this financial service provider, and I'm pretty sure our colleagues, from UNCTD will intervene on that, related to their national plan, to fight desertification and notably in the context of the land degradation neutrality they want to implement in their country. On va passer au troisième panéliste, Monsieur Moussa Bakayoko. Monsieur Bakayoko, vous êtes le fondateur de Siwara, une toute jeune société d'investissement dédiée à la diaspora africaine, mais aussi créée à l'initiative des membres de la diaspora. Siwara se veut porteuse d'innovation et d'impact pour le développement durable du continent africain. Ce qui serait intéressant que vous partagiez, c'est d'avoir un petit peu, connaître un petit peu votre profil d'entrepreneur, de votre parcours et comment vous voulez, à Siwara, donner une réponse au changement climatique dans les pays du Sahel. Et bien sûr, quels sont les moyens que vous utilisez, quelles stratégies vous avez déjà mis en place pour travailler.
Bonjour. Je pense que déjà, ce matin, j'ai entendu beaucoup de choses par rapport à la diaspora et cette volonté de connaître davantage cette diaspora. Euh, pour commencer, je pense que je vais représenter un profil de diaspora qui est pas suffisamment distingué parce que la diaspora, il y a beaucoup de diaspora au sein de la diaspora. Et je pense que souvent, il y a deux profils qui ne ressortent pas suffisamment. C'est les cadres les cadres supérieurs des diasporas dans les pays d'accueil ici, qui investissent différemment. Et il y a les descendants des premières générations de diaspora qui investissent aussi différemment. Là, je vais prendre l'exemple de cadres supérieurs parce que mon parcours, d'où l'explication et ce qu'on fait, rejoint cela. Moi, je suis né au Mali, j'ai grandi là-bas. Je suis venu en France pour mes études supérieures. Et au bout de 6 ans de conseil, j'ai décidé de créer ma propre société. Yele Consulting, qui est un cabinet de conseil et d'ingénierie qui intervient, spécialise la transition énergétique et environnementale. On est un des 5 leaders en France sur ce domaine-là, en tant que cabinet indépendant. Et on intervient également en Afrique, dans l'ensemble du continent, sur des missions en lien avec cette dimension climat, transition énergétique, etc. Et à l'intérieur de ça, je crée un groupe avec un certain nombre d'investissements. Je vais en citer 4 parce que je pense que les 4 peuvent être intéressants en termes de retour d'expérience. Et je finirai par Siwara pour détailler un peu plus. Le premier investissement que j'avais fait, c'était au Mali dans la formation. Rapidement, on en a parlé aujourd'hui, mais je pense que c'est une des clés de ce qu'on veut faire là. Je l'ai fait dans un centre de formation en transition énergétique et développement durable, avec notamment une dimension à zoomer davantage sur les formations techniques. L'idée là, c'était d'apprendre aux gens. On a fait pas mal de formations, notamment dans le milieu rural, à mettre en place, installer et exploiter des centrales photovoltaïques, entre autres. Ce qui est intéressant dans cet exemple que je voulais partager, c'est l'accompagnement que des organismes internationaux et l'État peuvent faire dans ce type de projet. Ce projet, malheureusement, au bout de 6 ans d'expérience avec plus de 700 personnes formées et un investissement en fonds propres de plus de 700 ou 800 000 euros, j'ai dû l'arrêter pour une raison toute simple, hein, besoin d'accompagnement technique sur place. Ce n'était pas de l'accompagnement en termes d'argent, mais c'était du support technique, des compétences techniques pour pouvoir développer ça sur place. Et notamment, et ça je reviendrai derrière dessus, un accompagnement par des institutions. On avait eu des discussions avec des institutions européennes sur ce projet et la nécessité pour ces institutions de pouvoir, j'ai envie de dire, adapter les outils, les méthodes d'accompagnement aux réalités terrain. Pour faire très simple, hein, on ne rentrait pas dans un certain nombre de cadres parce qu'on lançait une nouvelle activité et qu'il fallait une activité qui existe. Il y avait un investissement qui était orienté, mais vers les activités existantes. Et malheureusement, tous ces investissements ont été réalisés au Mali, au Burkina, sur des centres existants qui n'ont pas décollé, alors qu'un centre qui se mettait en place pouvait avoir un appui technique suffisamment dès le départ pour pouvoir, je pense, bien décoller. Donc, je pense qu'il y a vraiment ce premier message, et je reviendrai dessus sur d'autres expériences, sur l'adaptation de l'accompagnement aux réalités terrain. Et je pense qu'il n'y a pas suffisamment, qui ne va pas toujours bien. Deuxième exemple, c'est une entreprise dans le développement de projets au niveau rural, où on crée des zones d'activité électrifiées, où on aide des entrepreneurs à s'installer dans ces zones
et notamment des entrepreneurs agricoles avec la transformation agricole. On a fait ça, c'est un bon exemple, je pense, d'entreprise sociale, parce que c'est une entreprise sociale. Dans le capital, il y a une ONG dedans pour amener à développer au niveau rural. Ça, je pense que c'est le type d'exemple avec l'énergie, transition énergétique et développement rural qui peut permettre de développer des projets intéressants et qui mobilisent au niveau local une forte inclusion de communautés locales dans le développement de ce projet. Avant-dernier exemple et qui va amener à Siwara, c'est une entreprise qui développe, une entreprise technologique dans laquelle on a investi, qui développe des services assurantiels pour le milieu agricole. Aujourd'hui, c'est une entreprise qui est présente dans toute l'Afrique et qui s'est développée également en Asie, qui apporte des micro-assurances à des agriculteurs, plus de 11 millions d'agriculteurs aujourd'hui assurés. Et en fait, c'est cet exemple-là qui m'a donné envie de créer Siwara. Pour une raison toute simple, parce que c'est une entreprise qui a de l'impact sur place, mais en même temps qui a énormément performé. L'investissement réalisé il y a 5 ou 6 ans a été multiplié par plusieurs en peu de temps, tout en ayant énormément d'impact sur place. Et du coup, on s'est dit, moi, à l'initiative de ce projet, comment on peut créer un véhicule, finalement une société d'investissement qui va prendre des parts dans des structures, dans des entreprises, start-up et PME directement en Afrique, avec l'ambition d'amener ces entreprises-là à être des champions de leur domaine sur le continent. Donc vraiment des entreprises qui vont faire de la croissance et qui vont en même temps avoir de l'impact. Parce qu'on est convaincu que cet impact va passer par la création d'emplois. Et ces créations d'emplois vont maintenir, quand c'est le milieu rural, les gens dans le milieu rural, et quand c'est le milieu urbain, aider à développer davantage avec tous les impacts derrière sur le climat, par exemple. Ça fait partie clairement des critères qu'on a mis en place pour investir. Donc, on a créé Siwara Capital, qui est un fonds, une société d'investissement, à l'initiative de membres de la Diaspora pour apporter du capital dans ces entreprises, mais également, et ça a été dit ce matin, des compétences. C'est surtout ça qui est important parce qu'il faut savoir accompagner les chefs d'entreprise qui se lancent avec toutes les compétences qu'on retrouve par ailleurs de ces membres de la Diaspora. Donc concrètement, des partenariats avec un certain nombre d'acteurs de réseaux sur place qui nous sourcent en société dans lesquelles on investit. Aujourd'hui, Siwara, ça date d'il y a à peine un an, clairement. On a reçu plus de 80 dossiers, analysé 50 dossiers, des due deals avec une dizaine, et là, on est en train d'investir avec une en particulier. Voilà un peu comment ça se matérialise. Concrètement, et ça j'insiste beaucoup là-dessus parce que je pense que c'est une des clés, c'est une initiative qui mobilise la diaspora africaine à partir de la France, mais l'idée un peu partout, mais pas que. Notre objectif, c'est vraiment d'ouvrir un projet d'investissement, comme on l'a dit, de la diaspora et des amis de l'Afrique pour investir dans des structures africaines à haut potentiel et avec de l'impact quand même.
Merci, Moussa. J'ai bien aimé ta réflexion sur des fois, le manque d'agilité de certaines institutions et peut-être le dynamisme que l'on peut voir apparaître dans d'autres. Et ça m'interpelle parce que j'ai peut-être une question là-dessus. J'aimerais avoir ta vision de Siwara dans 20 ans. Est-ce que ça sera devenu un mastodonte? Est-ce que tu auras le monopole sur les pays du Sahel? Le nombre de projets, les secteurs dans lesquels tu aimerais te dédier? Dans 20 ans, il y aura eu beaucoup de choses se seront passées en termes de climat, en termes de technologie, l'intelligence artificielle. Donc, j'aimerais avoir un peu tu es un entrepreneur, tu dois avoir cette vision à plus 5, plus 10, plus 20 ans. Juste un petit peu ton avis là-dessus, l'évolution de la société, de ta société.
Je vais commencer par cette dimension, effectivement, agilité. Je pense que c'est quelque chose qui est important et que je voudrais souligner ici, en fait. C'est-à-dire que quand on lance une société, en tant qu'acteur privé, il est important de pouvoir se laisser les marges de manœuvre pour être agile. Je dis ça pourquoi, typiquement, la société, l'entreprise sociale qu'on a mis en place, avec l'ONG, on a mis beaucoup de temps à se mettre d'accord sur le mot. Je ne voulais absolument pas de mots qui nous interdisent d'être agiles finalement. C'est important de s'engager sur certaines choses, mais la réalité terrain doit permettre d'être agile et de s'adapter à cela. Et là, ça détermine ma vision du futur, dans le sens où, pour moi, ce qu'on a mis en place là, le modèle qu'on a mis en place, c'est un modèle transitoire vers quelque chose qui doit respecter, entre guillemets, s'insérer dans un modèle de société d'investissement comme on le voit par ailleurs, parce que c'est ça qui va permettre de passer à l'échelle. Il est important, il est urgent pour moi qu'on passe à l'échelle. Aujourd'hui, on est dans une logique où on veut investir dans un premier temps dans ce modèle transitoire 2 millions d'euros pour démontrer le modèle. Mais clairement, notre objectif, c'est, même très rapidement, avant 20 ans, 80 millions d'euros qu'on va mobiliser et multiplier ces chiffres-là qui peuvent servir de levier pour aller bien, bien plus loin dans 20 ans. Et pour ça, on aura besoin, ce matin, il y a eu un mot que j'ai bien apprécié, c'est de faire des ponts, créer des ponts. On a besoin qu'il y ait des ponts entre les gouvernants, les institutions comme les vôtres, comme on peut en rencontrer ici, et des acteurs privés comme nous. Et ces ponts doivent être agiles. C'est vraiment important. Parce qu'à un moment, quand on va vouloir investir dans telle ou telle zone, selon les réalités de ce qu'on va voir, on va s'adapter. L'objectif d'impact doit rester là, mais il doit avoir des ponts. Et aujourd'hui, clairement, nous, dans les secteurs qu'on vise, l'énergie, transition énergétique, l'agriculture, la finance, on voit un lien très fort sur ces trois secteurs. Et d'ici 20 ans, on veut être un acteur global sur l'ensemble du continent, dans nos investissements et en créant le plus d'emplois, parce qu'on reste convaincu que c'est vraiment ça qui va avoir un impact majeur sur les climats, dans le sens où on est convaincu que les gens, notamment au milieu rural, ils sont les premiers touchés par tout ce qui arrive. Donc, clairement, si on leur donne les moyens, si on les accompagne, si on leur montre les liens, ils sont en capacité de gérer un certain nombre de choses. Et ça, nous, on se positionne clairement par rapport à ça, avec le financement et les compétences.
Merci, Moussa, pour ce partage. Our first speaker is Mr. Raoul Antao, Senior Technical Specialist on Rural Youth and Social Inclusion at IFAD. Cher Raoul, you know very well the challenge rural youth is facing in the current context of climate change. You know, I have several questions for you. The first one will be, what issue do rural young, are facing in Africa, and what IFAD is doing, to overcome this issue? And what is the potential, of diaspora investment, that could be leveraged, that could be used, to be put at disposal of rural youth?
Thanks. Thank you, Maxime. I think maybe just to put a little bit more context also in what I'm about to say and why the stress on rural young people in particular, because I think there's good merit in discussing one of the key stakeholders in a lot of the work that we're doing, not just broadly with development, but also discussing here in the context of diaspora investment and remittances, is exactly at the end of that bridge, and who's really on the other side. And really, when you look at young people as stakeholders in particularly the African context, there's actually a huge potential that we're talking about here. And if I can just sort of jog everyone's memory back to when the 3S was first thought through and conceived, very much the focus back then was really, what do we do about Africa's growing youth labor force? And so a lot of this stems from there, because the ideas of security, sustainability, and stability really were talking to the ideas of how do we make sure that employment prospects can improve, particularly for younger populations. Now, Africa is going to be the youngest continent in the world as we're moving forward, and already 75% of just Western Central Africa is below the age of 32. So we're already talking about stakeholders we are going to be targeting anyways, we're going to be looking at. Now, rural young people, they do migrate. International migration for rural young people is really not very large. I mean, when I say not very large, I mean, we're talking about 10 to 12%. But what we've seen from studies is that when the adults of households leave and move out, young people very much take on a lot more responsibility for some of the livelihoods that are happening there. So it's all the more important that we start focusing on, well, how best do we manage young people's prospects for growth with livelihoods. Now, when we say young people, the word itself is slightly abstract. It's a social construct. Essentially, we're looking at the transition from adolescence into adulthood. And if we manage that transition well, we will have flourishing economies. So the idea now, at least the big mantra question that is always posed in the African context is, will young people be a ticking time bomb or a demographic dividend? We'd like to believe that it would be a demographic dividend. And a lot of our investments today, particularly in Africa, also 60% of IFAD's portfolio, more than 60% of IFAD's portfolio just in Africa is targeted towards young people. They're youth-sensitive projects that we sort of design and implement. But one of the issues and challenges that we keep seeing that emerges out, if I can simplify without getting into too many details, really what young people's needs are, they fall into three sort of buckets. The first one is youth need access to productive resources and assets. And this very much talks to the idea also, how do we get those quality inputs, as Frederick was mentioning? How do we get those climate smart technologies closer to young people so that they can actually access it? The second is really, how do youth improve upon their skills and capacities? And I think here's something that we all also have to recognize is that as we move towards a greener transition, skills themselves are going to be changing a lot. And so there's some skills that are going to become redundant. There are some skills that are going to have to be sort of improved. And there are some skills that we already have right now, but need to be sort of pushed forward and enhanced. So the ILO suggests that this just transition, as they're calling it, or the transition towards greener economies, really needs to look at also how we manage those skills change and the evolution that they sort of take on. So a lot of the focus, even in our projects, is looking at capacity building for young people. But I think we've also learned over the years that capacity building is not enough. In fact, for too long, perhaps development has taken on an approach of sort of building the skills of young people, and the kind of project closes down. So we're really trying to think now from a more outcome-based level. We're not really looking at output, how many trainings have happened, but we're really looking at how many jobs have been secured. Now, unfortunately, in the African context, about 25 million young people enter the labor force every year, but Africa's formal economy sort of makes only about 3 million jobs. So really, the need to absorb this growing labor force is a concern, and this is where initially also the 3S proposal came from, because even if we look at youth access to productive resources, you will see that youth access to land is one of the big issues, not only because the life expectancy has gone up, and so the inheritance to younger generations takes longer, but more population means also more fragmentation of that land. So trying to look at unproductive land, or trying to look at how we rehabilitate land that's not used and increase the management of land, particularly through some of the work that we're doing here, is sort of key for us. The third bucket is really about youth access to services. And these are multiple services. We're talking about extension services, we're talking about market services, but principally we're also talking about financial services. And we know that typically the financial landscape in rural economies in general, and this is Africa and beyond, tend to perceive young people as highly risky. And so there's a need to sort of look at how we de-risk a lot of this. And I think if I can catch one word that seems to be the lowest common denominator of the whole day, it's really risk management. And it's sort of all the way from where we're talking about, money starts and money ends. And I think for us over here, it's a landscape that we're doing a lot of work to try and see how do we work with partner financial institutions, microfinancing institutions, to see how we can look at alternative collaterals, about how we can look at de-risking, about how we can look at equity sharing, about how we can look at revolving funds, maybe matching grants. These are just many of the interventions IFAD tends to take within its projects. But one of the unique aspects over here is what we've learned is actually a lot of the funding and capital flows that young people get to start their enterprises actually stems a lot from their own family support. So when we see the idea of also diaspora investment and remittances, we see sort of these linkages here, but we're careful in the sense where we understand also remittances. And when we look at the number that you brought up today, about 200 USD sort of going back home, but it's not necessarily, well, one way to put it as development money. It's definitely from a family to family based money. And it's really then the question becomes, as has been mentioned already today, how do we maximize every one of those dollars? And that's really where we're coming in. So we see like this might be a very innovative channel to also look at how we can reach out to microfinancing institutions and saying, hey, here's probably another financial product that we can sort of bring in. So we've also put this into practice a little bit in some of our own projects. Mali is also one of the projects. It's a project called FIE, where we really targeted young people between the ages of 17 to 30. And of course, we broke up those age brackets. But the idea was really to try and see how we can leverage on some of the diaspora investments and remittances to see how they could feed into growth. I think there are a lot more lessons that we gathered from these projects, more than bountiful success stories. But I think it comes to the point that has already been made, is that we are really looking at a systems framework over here. And by that, we really need to think systemically a little bit, because there are multiple actors. We've talked about the bridges. So it's really about how do we look at this whole ecosystem? How do we look at this entire landscape and see who the players are? See how we best manage those risks and see where we can sort of converge on some of those win-win opportunities. So that's kind of like a lot of the work that we're doing on youth. But one of the questions that I think Maxime also asked me was really, how does this all link then to climate finance a little bit? And this is where IFAD's really sort of leading the forefront. We recognize that a lot of climate finance, there are serious deficits when it comes to some of the investments that go towards adaptation. And so that's a place where IFAD has now committed to almost 40% of its portfolio moving towards climate finance. We seem to be on track. The idea is simply to try and say that all the kind of investment interventions that are going forward, how do we make sure that they remain climate neutral, but also accelerate climate action? And that's where we look at technology, we look at service provision, we look at capacity, and finally, what IFAD does best is, as a rural broker, looking at market access for a lot of this. Not just on the supply out, but also on the supply in of a lot of these technologies. So that's kind of where we cover some of these elements. Maxime, I'm not sure if I've done justice to your question, but...
You did well, but I have some remarks.
Yeah, there we go.
No, maybe Raoul, you know IFAD very well. You have been involved in several projects, in IFAD, designing projects, supervising some projects. And I will ask you, do you see any opportunities, for Diaspora investor and remittances family to be enrolled, to be part in some IFAD activity or some other IFAD, that are funded by other institutions in the climate finance architecture, such as like the GEF or the GCF?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think the moment that we can leverage on the kind of climate finance that IFAD's able to mobilize itself, the more we're moving forward in terms of IFAD's own development pathway and growth, it seems to be that blended finance is sort of, the approach that's being taken on. So more and more the idea is to, as our AVP or the Associate Vice President was saying this morning, we really position ourselves as an assembler of finance. And so that said, we can sort of reach out to the GCF, the GEF, and mobilize a lot of this climate finance, which is what we're doing today. And what we're, to give you an example of one of the projects that we're looking at, it's called IGRIFIN, and this is very much based in the Sahel in Africa. The idea is very simply to look at how we get green lines of credit towards young people, farming communities, cooperatives, and basically small-scale producers. But to do that, there are a few hurdles that we need to sort of jump over. Something as simple as doing what one might have to do for a green line of credit is to do an ESG assessment or an environmental, social, and governance assessment. These are things where perhaps even the private sector itself is not fully ready or doesn't fully have the capacity. And here's where we also look at how we use the channel of these resources to have a technical assistance fund to basically help build the capacity, not just of the on-lending financial institutions, but also how do we build the capacity of where capital demand is, and that is with the cooperatives, the young people. So these are things that we are sort of putting in play right now. And to give you a more practical example, one of the initiatives that we've been running recently is something called, we're calling it the agribusiness hubs. And essentially, it works as a one-stop shop to make sure that not only do we start building the skills of young people, but we start reaching out to the private sector to understand what are the labor market needs and how best can we sort of look at more tailored design, custom skill development, so that matches a lot of the private sector needs. In particular, we're looking at private sector companies which have, let's say, more green jobs or more jobs that relate to like low carbon emissions. So accordingly, then we design sort of just a training curricula, but then we look at leveraging on some of these climate finances to try and see how that capital flow can come in. And rest assured, I mean, the more money we can sort of pool in, the idea being that crowdfunding really helps in some ways of also risk sharing a lot more. We can see a lot more potential to sort of have interventions like these sort of grow even through remittances and diaspora investment channels.
Thanks, Raoul. So I'm a very nice moderator, you know, because you were supposed to have like 10 minutes. You took like all 15 minutes to present your activity. So could you very quickly, you know, if you have like any reaction, you know, to what has been said by your co-panelists, please, I'll leave you 2 minutes, you know, to reflect on what just Raoul just say or what Moudou or some Moussa say. If you have nothing to say, you know, we will open the Q&A session. Frédéric?
I want to thank Raoul to introduce a youth topic, because the 3S initiative, it's about security, sustainability, stability. So, and the way we address those 3S is through remittances, through diaspora investment, but also to mitigate migration, which is the strategy by default. And more migration, it becomes difficult, dangerous, and unproductive. So this is where remittances, diaspora investment are so important to leverage. But this is part of the same equation, I think, in the 3S, and for the audience, it's important to understand how the different bricks are, let's say, consistent together. And I think this is where the linkage is extremely powerful. What we want is to help the youth to stay and help the those that are left to support those who stays with some tools that are not yet there. And to get there, we need partnership. We need an approach that is consistent.
Thanks, Frédéric. So we can open the Q&A. Any question from the audience? So we can collect a couple of questions. And then please introduce yourself and just mention at whom the question is addressed.
Thank you. I have a question for Mr. Bagayoko from Siwara as an entrepreneur. Pardon me. An entrepreneur that I knew a long time ago, he was an old man at that point, told me that as an ambitious young man, he walked into a automobile dealership, a Rolls-Royce dealership. And he said to the salesman, "I'm going to drive one of those someday." And the salesman looked at him and he said, "You know, we get a lot of dreamers in here." 5 years later, he bought a Rolls Royce and he sent a copy of the receipt to the other salesman. And he said, you know, I bought this from somebody else. And my advice to you is always take people's dreams seriously. So as an entrepreneur working with young people in Africa, how do you keep those dreams? How do you promote those dreams?
So my name is Shino Ikomi. I'm the founder of Oriki Energy. And I just wanted to make a little comment prior to that to connect the dots. We talked a bit about, innovation in terms of mobile phones, mobile money, mobile transactions. But in terms of climate tech, I think we missed and we hovered around that. We missed the point of the real sort of revolution that is coming out of the climate tech sector in Africa, which is the decentralized sort of power systems with the pay-as-you-go systems. And I think this is a key element to be able to unlock basically productive remittances from the diaspora back to beneficiaries back at home in Africa. I'll just take a few sort of use cases that we had at Oriki in Nigeria, where basically we're able to deploy these solar assets for productive use for people to start a business throughout basically the country in Nigeria. And over 6 months, none of them defaulted. They've been able to generate a daily income. They've been able to cater to their daily needs, pay their rents, pay their school fees, pay their healthcare, and have enough money to be able to remit back the capital investment that was made from the diaspora. So this is a key element, I think, and it sort of connects the dots in all that was spoken today about the productive use of sort of remittances from the diaspora, but tailored and directed to basically an asset that is solar bay asset, which is sustainable, which allows you to basically become an entrepreneur, generate your own revenues, and obviously become sort of give you a path to financial sort of independence or financial freedom. So I just wanted to make those sort of points done.
Thanks a lot. Moussa, you want to answer? Still?
Oui. Je leur dis de croire à leurs rêves, pour une raison toute simple. Pendant longtemps, personnellement, par exemple, j'ai été assez discret, d'une certaine manière. La semaine dernière, j'ai été sélectionné parmi les 30 leaders européens de la diaspora malienne à l'étranger qui font le plus de choses. Je n'arrivais pas à le publier en ligne parce que par modestie, ça me gênait de le faire. Mais quelqu'un m'a dit quelque chose et ça, je pense que c'est vrai. C'est-à-dire que ça reste des rôles inspirants. À 18 ans, quand je suis venu en France, je ne pensais pas à créer une des sociétés qui serait leader de son domaine. Et du coup, quand on discute avec ces jeunes et qu'on leur montre qu'il y a des exemples qui arrivent de chaque côté d'ailleurs, hein, ça inspire. Et du coup, ils croient à leurs rêves. Et je pense que c'est vraiment ça qui est important. C'est par l'exemple, montrer qu'ils peuvent y arriver et que, pas seulement de manière utopique, c'est que Siwara et l'action qu'on met en place est là pour les aider, non seulement financièrement, mais également par les compétences. Et ça, j'insiste vraiment beaucoup là-dessus. C'est-à-dire que quand on vient aujourd'hui, bon, j'ai une autre société qui investit en France, je ne regarde pas les projets de la même façon. Quand on me présente un projet venant d'Afrique, je vais énormément m'appuyer sur une dimension intuition, le porteur du projet, l'ouverture d'esprit de la personne et comment je peux l'aider à être beaucoup plus ambitieux et à atteindre ses objectifs. Et quand je sens ça, je vais regarder le projet derrière un peu plus. Et dans ces cadres-là, en général, très vite, ça vient. Hein, ils y croient. En plus, ils ont des exemples, ça marche.
Colleagues, any question? En français, in English? Patrick? I'm not sure about the live.
Just a simple question.
No, it was Catherine first, and then you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think maybe the question I'm going to ask is a bit controversial, but I'll take the risk. I'm just wondering, when we talk about investing in rural areas, how do we even attract the diaspora and even the youth when we continue to label them as rural areas, because these are areas that are seen as poor areas. So when we're in this whole discussion, particularly when you think about the youth, they obviously want to go where the opportunities are for them to have livelihoods, for them to test their entrepreneurial skills. But how would they do this in areas that we are labeling as rural areas? So I think for me, that's a question that I keep asking myself, particularly when you're linking that with the diaspora, because they're going out looking for opportunities in countries that are considered to be wealthy, where the wealth is. So why would I put money in a rural area?
Yeah, and you are coming from UNCCG. Dear colleagues, your question?
Why the focus on sending money as opposed to giving an opportunity? You know, we talk a lot about, you know, the transactions and the flow of remittances. And so that involves basically money from going from point A to point B. So why always the focus on basically sending money as opposed to giving more than money, for example?
Okay.
I don't know if somebody can answer.
Yeah. Raoul, you want to answer to
I'll
that
take
same question?
the tough question on the definition of the word rural and its connotation.
No, but maybe also perhaps it's a connotation that we've also attributed to the word rural over time, and it's somehow become sort of synonymous with the word poverty. And as a result, maybe we are saying the word rural here in this room, but I'm sure where in their areas, they look at it as my hometown. But that said, it is a very valid point that you're bringing up, that rural young people do look at agriculture almost as a sort of backward activity. They look at it, they tend to perceive it very negatively. They look at it almost as sort of, you know, a backbreaking job on the land itself. And I think there's an added complexity of now, you know, with high proliferation of more technology, you have more exposure to the rest of the world also, and you have more exposure to other ways of living in the world. And there is a natural ambition that each and every one of us will always grow through and will want to seek a better way. But that said, at least from our work that we're doing, you know, there used to be a narrative that farming is an aging activity. The data actually today is suggesting that actually that might just have been a myth that got circulated, but actually the average age, if you really want to look at all the data, comes to around 34. So there is still a lot of young people, let's say, in rural communities. And it is true that while they might perceive it as something negative, they're very happy to get into anything so long as it has something which is a little bit more rewarding than what they perceived it to be. And that said, one of the things that we are also looking at is to look slightly beyond also agriculture and look at the rural economy at large, because there's a lot of growth happening. In fact, one of the things that even IFADs come to recognize is that there used to be a clear distinction between rurality and urban sort of landscapes, but that is getting to be a lot more of a blurred line with a lot of more semi-urban and peri-urban sort of livelihoods taking off. And there seems to be also some sort of clustering around that. Regardless, it opens these sort of economies to a lot more activities. There are now things we are investing in which might not have anything to do with agriculture per se. I mean, to give you a simple example of, there are interventions we've had for young people who want to become hairdressers, young women, or to become you know, tailors in their own communities, which we sort of come in to try and see how they flourish. Because at the end of the day, they just kind of look at this sort of thing that they're looking in their phones and their whatever access they have to whatever exposure of other ways of living is. They're more than happy to have that even sort of come here, but it can only come here if the rural transformation matches with the structural transformation and pace at which it grows. And I think there is a lot of opportunity that is coming to the fore. And I guess for us, it clearly comes from a lot of the impact assessments that we do, where you are seeing you know, the kind of return on investment being high enough for young people to sort of buy into it. On the diaspora side, I think it's just simply, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure FFR team will be more than happy to say it, but the way I say it is that it's love and care at the end of the day. You know, I mean, this is my family. You know, I would love to sort of help them to sort of grow, but I'm sure you'll have a better answer than love and care. So
Si je peux rajouter un exemple par rapport à ça, c'est, je pense en tout cas de ce que je vois, c'est plus en opportunité réellement que rural ou urbain. Moi, dans le panel de projets qu'on présente à nos différents investisseurs ou investisseurs potentiels aujourd'hui issus de la diaspora, le projet en zone d'activité électrifiée en milieu rural attire plus d'intérêt et d'envie d'investir que le projet en milieu urbain parce que les gens y voient une véritable opportunité de toucher le plus de monde, d'avoir le plus d'impact et d'avoir des retours sur investissement. Après, par contre, la réalité, c'est que ça présente plus de risques et que effectivement, si on sait accompagner à maîtriser les risques dans ces investissements-là, ça va motiver davantage. Un des moyens de maîtrise des risques, on a déjà parlé avec le FIDA dans les échanges, par exemple, c'est les mécanismes de garantie qui peuvent être mis en place. Mais clairement, aujourd'hui, quand je regarde les panels de projets, le projet en milieu rural attire énormément plus. C'est comme si on a tous un petit sentiment d'être rattaché à la terre et au milieu rural, et ça attire quand même beaucoup plus que le milieu urbain. Par contre, il faut aider un peu à gérer les risques qui sont souvent avec ces projets parce que souvent, le business model n'est quand même pas évident.
I will build on what my colleagues said. Beyond love and care, people, they come from rural areas, so they invest in what they know the best. So in many cases, I think this is the case of Modu as well. They are practicing agriculture, so they want to invest in what they know. So as soon as they have access to water, they can develop some farm activities. So this is one reason, which is purely economic. In terms of investment, we mainly think of agribusinesses, which are companies buying crops from small producers. So this is not directly investing in small producers, but investing in agribusinesses. So we can have some the spillover effect on small producers and rural areas. And to also complement and go in the same direction as Moussa said. So to invest in farm activities or in, let's say, rural activities that are exposed to climate changes and some, let's say, aspects that are more vulnerable than in urban centers. There's a need to provide some incentive and some de-risking mechanism. So he mentioned guarantee, but this is guarantee can be an incentive for the diaspora to take a risk to invest in rural businesses or agri-businesses or businesses that are exposed to rural risk or climate risk. This is one incentive. Another one is also to, and more we realize that working with diaspora investors is also to support investment readiness of enterprises in which they can invest, because especially, let's say, agri-businesses or let's say businesses that are dealing in solar system, decentralized solar system, for instance, enterprises, they are exposed to certain risk. Sometimes also they lack some, let's say, financial statement, formalization, and so on. So they don't necessarily have the same level of sophistication, transparency, and culture of governance that allows for quick investment. So this is something that we are also thinking about. This is part of the de-risking package.
Modou, tu souhaites rajouter un point sur cette question
Oui,
de la jeunesse?
j'aimerais dire que, par exemple, chez nous, comme je l'ai déjà dit, à l'époque, il n'y avait pas l'école. Mais maintenant, aujourd'hui, je peux vous dire que chez nous, de nous vers la France, on a plus de 20, 30 étudiants qui sont là, dans les grandes universités françaises. Il quitte la France, il va directement au village. Le village n'est pas plus considéré comme à l'époque. C'est parce que chez nous, on a l'Internet, il y a l'électricité, il y a tout ce qui est dans les grandes villes. Du coup, on peut dire que vraiment, dans les villages que je connais, et je connais assez de villages, vraiment, même à l'intérieur, il y a l'Internet, il y a tout. Les gens, ils vivent mieux là-bas qu'à Dakar, parce qu'il y a la pollution à Dakar, il y a assez d'embouteillages, etc., etc. On a vu même des migrants qui retournent durant la saison d'agricole, qui retournent chez lui à faire l'agriculture. Après, ils rentrent en Italie. Il y a quelqu'un qui va, après la récolte, qui va acheter pour faire la transformation, pour faire la commercialisation. Vraiment, au niveau rural, on peut dire qu'il y a un peu de développement maintenant. Ce qui manque, c'est des instruments d'accompagnement, etc., et améliorer. Il faut que les gouvernements et les entrepreneurs européens aussi, surtout les entrepreneurs italiens, nous sommes interpellés quelquefois des entrepreneurs italiens qui nous disent on va investir au Sénégal, ceci, cela, mais qu'ils parlent simplement. Quand tu le mets en direct, en contact avec des entrepreneurs ou des investisseurs sénégalais, il ne veut pas mettre l'argent. Par exemple, j'ai 2 cas à vous dire. Il y avait un groupe italien qui m'a dit on veut investir sur le domaine du solaire. J'avais un ami qui a plus de 10 stations de service. Il dit je paye beaucoup d'électricité. Je peux mettre à disposition 2 millions d'euros. Combien vous, Italiens, là, vous pouvez mettre à disposition? Les Italiens qui disent rien. Alors, comment on peut travailler? Alors, c'est important pour nous, vraiment, quand on parle de l'investissement de la diaspora, et aussi que les Européens puissent même mettre de l'argent. Sinon, on ne fait que blabla. Hein. Merci.
Merci, merci Modou. I will give the floor to Pedro for some reaction.
Yes, I wanted to answer, but I think every single one has already touched upon many things. But the point that I wanted to contribute, particularly with the initiative on 3S that we're going to be presenting, is it is indeed about the financial contribution of migrants, but also those in kind. And we're including entrepreneurship. It might not admit it in the title, but the idea is this. Many reach a stage where they would like to return with the skill set that they might have acquired, or also the capital. Disclaimer though, it is, while migration is an entrepreneurial activity, if you think of it, high risk, etc., that doesn't make you an entrepreneur from the get-go. And this is to be identified from the beginning. You might have the aspiration, as you says, yes, I want to invest, or investor, by the way. And then when the real moment comes, you know, there's a lot of stories about returnees that didn't do good investments, and they had to re-enter the cycle of migration, and cite many examples of that, and not just of people, of groups of people, just because they didn't have the right support, etc. So the incentives are there, but the support is necessary. And yes, love and care. I mean, John Lennon would have loved that, because you don't need to imagine it. This is the reality, actually. So that there's no value in it. There's no price in people, the reasons that motivates, and many times they fail and they continue to do that. And I think this needs to be really valued. I would like to finish with one example in a project that we did with IFAD and the FFR in Nepal. This morning it was said, some countries do something about migration. In Nepal, their lesson learned was that they put everything in place to export human labor. They will basically organize unemployed Nepalese and ship over 1,000 a day to countries that needed that for constructions, etc. They were very well organized in bringing people out. What they were not organized is in reintegrating those people once they had finished their tour of duty, if you can call it that way. They had no infrastructure to do so. And I think with IFAD, what we did, we supported that. We supported their reintegration, applying the skill sets that they have. And it is really actually, we can see today this being much more successful. And what we see in rural villages in Nepal, oftentimes going back to the entrepreneurship, I remember a specific village that I visit, and you had a fish farm with solar panels in the middle of the mountain, really a pure village as we all imagine, and a fish farm for trouts, solar panels, and in the middle of the little houses, there was a cafe that was playing more the role of a town hall. Interesting enough, the owners of these two things were migrants that came back with enough finance to acquire that. It's extremely successful. They're exporting now to the surrounding villages the fish. So this is just to show the entrepreneurial aspect in the equation that we're proposing is extremely important. And that for the community as a whole was very inspiring. Now there's a problem in that, and we need to be very realistic because it sells the point that when you leave, you become successful. So that for the youth is a problem too. So inspirational explanation, financial literacy, education is extremely important because otherwise this little thing would do it, and this became very smart, and it sells you that outside is better, social media, any youth that is outside and migrate is never going to start texting and telling his community that life is awful. I need to work from 6 to 8. And he doesn't say that. He's going to take a nice selfie in a nice place to say that it was worth it. And that's the message that's passed. This is a reality multiplied by millions. We have a problem now on youth. So I just wanted to do a little bit of the yin and yang of this reality. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Pedro. So we are almost on time, Your last question, last remark? Please, give it 2 minutes, and then we have to close the session.
D'accord, merci. Mais je voudrais m'adresser à mes deux, mon ami du Mali et du Sénégal. Est-ce que vous savez que tout ce que vous avez raconté, je ne crois pas en vous? Je suis Tanyabou Lazare, mais pour pouvoir vous titiller, je vais ajouter que je m'appelle Thomas. Si je ne vois pas, je ne crois pas. Tout simplement, c'est pour dire que vous êtes une pluie. Et l'histoire, ou du moins la leçon de votre vie, m'a démontré que vous n'avez pas vécu pour vous-même, mais pour les autres. Et que donc, le modèle de contribution au développement m'a vraiment inspiré. Et je voudrais tout simplement vous dire qu'il y a des frontières qui vous attendent et vous devez aller au-delà du Sénégal et du Mali. Donc, les prochains lieux où vous allez déposer vos valises, c'est au Burkina Faso. Donc, je devance tout le monde dans cette salle officiellement pour dire que je voudrais vraiment nouer collaboration avec vous pour voir comment est-ce que vous allez faire briller, en tout cas, vos rayons dans mon pays. Et encore merci pour ce que vous avez été fait. Bravo à vous. Et voilà, c'est vraiment une leçon de vie à partager au retour dans nos pays. Je vous remercie.
Merci pour ce retour. C'est exactement ce qu'on va faire dans la prochaine session. On va présenter le proposal, c'est du design à l'action, et chacun sera libre d'intervenir, de mettre en avant ses propres besoins, ses propres approches qui sont spécifiques au contexte dans lequel ils interviennent, que ce soit thématique ou géographique. We close the session. We have like a short coffee break, 20 minutes max, and we see you again in like 20 minutes at 3:30. Yeah. Thanks a lot.